Today, this place is called Mission Space. When Epcot first opened, this was Horizons, one of the most spectacular attractions I've ever seen. The attention to detail that went into this attraction, things that they did here, how they articulated what they wanted it to be, something about the future and the future of humanity, how we would go into the deserts and into space and under the sea to live was really remarkable. And when you stop to think about the fact that they referred to it internally as the Carousel of Progress 2.0, they really did have a vision for it. They had a plan for what they wanted this to be. And so Horizons was really something. So anyway, let's go back in history and talk about what was Horizons. Horizons was unique. It was different. It was special. It went into a different realm and was an exhibition of sorts and took storytelling to a different level. And still, if you look on the internet and Google Horizons at Disney World, you'll find that there are a lot of tribute sites and a lot of information about Horizons and what it was. People are still talking about it. It's amazing how many people have become interested in it or perhaps stayed interested in it because it was demolished over 25 years ago. Horizons was on the drawing board when Epcot was originally conceived in the 1970s, but it was not built in time for park opening, since both time and money were concerns at Disney as they drove toward that October 1st, 1982 deadline. But it was the first new attraction that opened at Epcot, and it did open on the park's first anniversary, October 1st, 1983. Disney had gone hard after General Electric as the title sponsor because it made so much sense. GE was the sponsor of the Carousel of Progress, and besides, GE's tagline at the time was that they brought great things to life, and that really was the basis for this attraction. It took some time and effort for that sponsorship to get nailed down, but they did finally come to a 10-year sponsorship agreement, and that's when construction actually started in earnest, when they had that money secured for themselves. The basic concept was to build on the idea for Tomorrowland. It was a vision of the future and what the future might look like. Here it was 1979, and the concept was to look ahead about 25 years into the 21st century. It was a very interesting idea to create this vision of the future, but remember that Epcot itself was intended to be a model for the future in its entirety, a future that had a community of people living and working together and all the newest technology. This attraction was a representative example of how this was going to be showcased throughout the park. In a way, Horizons was kind of like a Tomorrowland on steroids. It would showcase what might happen in the 21st century and what lay just beyond the horizon. Imagineer George McGinnis, in an interview with the website Mouse Planet back in 2004, said that the Horizons show would pick up from the story of the Carousel of Progress by presenting the show's memorable family one generation older. The parents and grandparents would communicate with their kids spread out all over the world and even into space. The story would be a familiar sequence through past, present, and future. The past was presented as looking back at the future as science fiction writers portrayed it. The present, viewed on the giant Omnimax screens as the current science images from the space shuttle lifting off to a molecular structure DNA, with films by Eddie Carrick. The future would let us visit family members and habitats and environments that are still a dream in scientists' minds. The father and mother kept in touch with their children between these distant places via holographic devices. Now, I think that's a pretty good synopsis of what the ride was all about. What I find most intriguing is that this was an extension of the Carousel of Progress and that family. It really did take one of Walt's visions and expand on it. Remember that in the Carousel of Progress, we looked at the family at the turn of the 20th century, then the 1920s, the 1940s, and then in its original incarnation, the 1960s. Horizons was going to extend on that idea. The look back into the past was going to capture the 1800s, then move ahead to what was the present day in the 1980s and end up in the 21st century. And here's where we can see the original name came into play. It was originally going to be called Century 3. The 1800s then would be the first century, the 1980s would be the second century, and the 21st century would be the third century. This is why I also think of it as sort of Tomorrowland on steroids. It's a continuation of the theme, but with room for growth. Rather than focusing on today as the Carousel did, it looked more into the future. Remember that the Carousel always suffered from an identity crisis because after the 1960s, they decided to update the fourth scene Then it became the 1980s, and then later into the 1990s. So they expanded out the length of time between the 40s and that last scene. For Horizons, this attraction was meticulous in its detail, and it was probably one of the most detailed attractions in the entire resort. From the costumes, to the paintings, to the musical score, and even to the orange smell, the Imagineers really set a standard for excellence. Every bit and piece had its purpose and appears to have been deliberately put in place. They considered how to make everything real, or at least realistic. They got people to think about things and wonder about the future. As an aside, that's one of the things I love about Disney. They take the time to teach you things by making it fun, understandable, relatable, and interactive. Oftentimes, you don't even realize that you're learning something. They're teaching you something new and you've learned it. And you think back in your mind and say, wait, I learned that. For Horizons, the ride system they decided on was the Omnimover. But there's an important distinction here with the typical Omnimover. For all the rides that Disney had made to this point, the Omnimover was controlled from below the ride vehicle. But in this case, they decided to make it a hanging vehicle, in which case the mechanics of it were above the vehicle. So it was a completely new design in that sense, something they had never tried before, and it really did pay off because it made something really unique. As I've discussed before, this is a technology that Disney developed to take guests through a series of scenes at a specific interval. It really amounts to a bunch of cars or ride vehicles that are attached together and pull below the track. It's incredibly simple and deceptively complex. I'll put a link to a show I did specifically about the Omnimover up on the card on the top left. The Imagineers can control the story. They decide the angles you will see and for how long and what direction you're going to exit them. And possibly more importantly, the system's constant motion has the effect of reducing your queue time, unlike an attraction that has to stop and unload regularly. I also mentioned that the music is an important facet of this attraction. Disney decided to create some entirely new compositions specifically for this attraction. George Wilkins, Disney's resident composer, was tabbed to write the music. He's responsible for writing, arranging, and producing over 36 hours of film, theater, pavilion attractions at Epcot, Disney World, Disneyland, California, France, Tokyo, and China. In his over 22 years with the company, he'd written all manner of shows, but he was instrumental, pun intended, in making a future that would come alive. He pulled together a full orchestra to perform music to be played during the ride. There are two things I always think about on this ride: the orange smell and the music. Music really made the attraction, and to hear it now and think of the scene that it appeared in is really intriguing to me. And on the topic of the orange smell, Disney Imagineer Bob McCarthy came up with a sort of cannon that could shoot compressed air with a scent mixed into it in the direction of guests to trigger another sensory experience. To this point, Disney had used a fan with a few drops of scent to delight guests in places like the bakery along Main Street. But Epcot brought this to new levels. The technology was added to many of the Future World attractions and allowed for a more complete, full sensory, and immersive experience. The Omnimax film is another important piece to this attraction. It really was the centerpiece of what would be the present-day part of the show. The backstory to Omnimax is that a few Canadian entrepreneurs came up with a large film format, a 70mm film. That's twice the traditional size of the standard film technology of 35mm. That technology used a single projector that was revolutionary in the 1970s. The larger format allowed for a projected image to be displayed on a larger screen with no distortion or graininess. A 35mm film shown on a 90-foot screen would have had some graininess or distortion in the picture itself. You would have noticed it. Now these Canadian entrepreneurs called their company IMAX and sold the equipment to various locations. Later, they enhanced on the technology to allow for the film to be projected onto a dome, and then they improved on that by filming through a special fisheye lens, that's one that has a little distortion to it, and then they projected it back through a similar fisheye lens, and that allowed for a large panorama to be displayed on a curved surface. That technology was known as Omnimax. Disney worked with the company to take this even further, adding the element of a moving ride as you're looking at the images, but keeping the image relatively static from your vantage point. They accomplished this by having multiple screens in front of the ride vehicles as it turned, and using some special optical tricks to make it appear as though it was static to you. This is another place where Disney really thought through how to make this ride special. Sure, they put the Omnimax film in there, but they took it to a new level because they had the moving ride vehicles going around 3 screens, seeing everything kind of happening as you turned. But it always appeared to be in the same place for you, and almost like you were standing still for some period of time. Oh yeah, truly remarkable. Horizons was a collection of individual elements that made the ride spectacular. You had the Omnimax, the intentionally detailed storyline that kept moving along, and you were viewing it through the lens of this family. Here's a description from the pictorial souvenir of Walt Disney World that appeared in 1988. The gem-like structure that houses Horizons is dedicated to humanity's future, with an accent on human. It is a careful synthesis of all the wonders within Epcot Center, and applies the various elements of communication, energy, transportation, creativity, and technology to a better life for the family of the future. Visitors to Horizons first arrive in Futureport, a transportation terminal of the future. While waiting to board their vehicle, they can view three-dimensional scenes of bustling futuristic cities, a space colony, or a floating habitat in the Pacific. Soon, however, the guests embark for the Horizons Sight and Sound Show, which begins with a series of scenes depicting ideas for the future from the past, including a Jules Verne spaceship, 19th century French futurist Albert Robita's vision of Paris in 1850, and living quarters of the future, as conceived by forward-looking thinkers of the 1930s and 40s. After looking back at tomorrow, guests are whisked into a series of present-day dreams come true by the Omnisphere, where they are surrounded by the thermal cityscape, a robot manufacturing plant, the architecture of the microchip, exploration of the undersea frontiers, and others of today's technological wonders. Then it's on to the 21st century, with the accent on quality of life. Tomorrow's Horizons include youthful old age, farms made fruitful in the desert, travel made energy efficient through magnetic power, undersea resources harvested by robot power, and space colonies growing crystals for industry in the absence of gravity. For the return to the planet, guests are given the option to choose one of 3 modes of transportation: a personal submarine, a desert hovercraft, or spaceflight. When their arrival back at Futureport is announced, Horizons guests have a new view of tomorrow's tantalizing possibilities. There was originally a plan for a post-show exhibit. General Electric had a full range of businesses that they could showcase for guests. Imagineers pitched a post-show concept they called Future Fair. The idea was to show technologies that overlap thematically with scenes in the ride. It would include a medical system for diagnostic imaging, an international theater that would have shown helicopter views of mining, hydropower, and construction operations. There would have even been something called the Free Enterprising Community, a puppet or maybe film show that would travel with the guests on sort of a circular moving sidewalk. It would also include GE Information Services and Mark III computers, demonstrating mobile radio operations, hosting quizzes, and so forth to make it interactive for guests. A representation of science and technology might be presented with a kaleidoscope to use computer chips, personal work, and man-made diamonds. It would also include simulators, which were high-speed vehicle experiences like a race car, research and development areas with aircraft engines, new materials, energy systems, and even plastics. But as you may have assumed, because this never got built, this idea was scuttled before it got too far along. The story goes that then CEO Jack Welch personally rejected it because it was too commercial. Now, how funny is that? I have trouble wrapping my brain around a CEO reacting that way, saying it's too commercial. Now, maybe he's right. These things would have been a better fit in what was Communicore, rather than in this part of Horizons. GE was very aware of their impact and how their dollars were returned in various ways. They did exit polling of guests from the time the ride opened until they stopped sponsorship. While guests enjoyed the ride, they were not making the connection between the ride and GE. Now, interestingly, the Future Fair would have provided that sort of obvious solution, but instead, GE decided that they could simply put logos on specific set pieces to make that connection. So in the show's future scenes, some of the artistic pieces were removed and replaced with lighted corded areas in a large static electricity with a light bulb containing the GE logo. And their polling showed that this improved guest awareness of sponsorship. Now, by the way, no good idea ever goes to waste at Disney. Many of the concepts and issues that Future Fair would have explored are still relevant today, and a couple of these concepts still saw the light of day in other pavilions in slightly different ways, but at least the message got out there, and the Imagineers were communicating with guests about some of the wonderful things that they could experience and be educated on along the way. Horizons explored communication, energy, transportation, imagination, land, sea, and futuristic families. The queue was intended to feel like an airport departure lounge, with signs for various far-off destinations. There were some old-time drawings in the windows along the way. There were commercials for some of those destinations that played over the loudspeaker system and on the monitors over your head.
Sea Castle, the newest and most exciting floating city in the Pacific, invites you and your family to come away with us to the sea. Convenient daily departures by sea train and skylift.
Mesa Verde, the most advanced desert reclamation complex in the Western Hemisphere, invites you to explore its wide range of career possibilities. Maglev Express service to Mesa Verde leaves every 30 minutes.
Brava Centauri, newest of the exciting Centauri series of space stations, offers remarkably rewarding opportunities in Earth support vocations. Come up to Brava. Space shuttles depart daily.
When you entered your ride vehicle, a man and a woman, who we learn later are the grandparents in the Carousel of Progress, and they extend in to be your hosts. They help us move along and keep it relatable. Veteran voice actor Bob Holt is the grandfather, and Dina Dietrich, who is the character actress in a large number of shows, played the grandmother. In the early days, you passed a mural that had detailed visions of the future, but GE asked to change that and evoke the idea of light bulbs in a way, and so it evolved. It's an incredible journey through lifestyles of the 21st century. You're going to see and examine the marvels imagined by visionaries of the past. These are views of the future from the 1800s, starting with a look at Jules Verne's Moonshot. Then it's the Man in the Moon, and other depictions of the future in the style of artist Rubita, flying machines, and so on that went along. Then comes the specific throwback to the Carousel of Progress. The song, The Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow, is playing, and you're looking into the scene's futuristic home, with a window behind them. It's familiar in a way. There's a father figure looking out over the city, a robot butler, and a grandfatherly type having a shave by an automated machine, and a robot in a kitchen that's malfunctioned to add to the humor. And then it's on to the 1950s, with its vision of the era and a fantastic view of the future. It's neon and sock hops, and we hear the famous line that speaks to all of us.
If we can dream it, we can do it.
Then we transition into the theater and see the Omnimax images before us. And then it's on to see the family in different places. We start in Nova Cité and see your host in his house. Again, something that feels like the Carousel of Progress. We're then introduced to the kids who live in land, space, and undersea. First is Mesa Verde, the land. It's a desert, and we learn how they live there. Again, it's a kind of Carousel of Progress view into their lives via introduction and then seeing them in their activities. And this is where the orange groves and the orange smell come into play. And then it's on to undersea adventures that includes an audio animatronic woman talking to the video of a man, and a video of that woman talking to the video, and audio animatronic of that man on the other side of that conversation. We then move undersea and have a view into the world of Sea Castle, with floating cities and a school class about to dive into the ocean. In what could best be described as sort of a Jules Verne version of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, diving helmets. And then it's on to being in space. Brava Centauri is our new destination. We wind up seeing another view of the family, kind of like the Carousel of Progress. And then they bring the family together for a birthday celebration. It combines some appearances of holograms using the Pepper's Ghost effect.
Happy birthday to you.
And then came the last part of the attraction, the Create Your Own Adventure.
Attention Horizons passengers. You are invited to choose your own flight path back to the future port. Please look down at the lighted panels in front of you. Press one of the three ride choices: space, desert, or undersea. Everyone can choose. Majority rules. All passengers, make your selections now.
If I'm being honest, considering how sophisticated the rest of the ride is, this was fairly weak and not compelling. It could have been so much more, and may have been had they had more sponsorship and more money to play with. You picked your adventure, you went undersea, you went into space, or you went into the desert, and you followed along on a little adventure. And that was it. That was the attraction in a nutshell. That's the entirety of what Horizons was. I don't think I really did it justice. I don't think I really captured what Horizons really was, and I encourage you to go out and watch other videos of the entirety of the ride, to go and look at some of the great websites that exist out there and think about what Horizons really was all about. Disney invented a new technology. What they did and patented was to have a series of screens that were presented in front of you. So the ride vehicle was moving along, and in front of you were a series of screens. And there were projectors projecting images onto those screens. But because you were moving, they had to update the images on those screens to always appear as though they were static to you. And one of the ways that they accomplished this was to fold out some panels on either side of each one of the ride vehicles so you couldn't see what was happening in the ride vehicles next to you. And because it could be that either one of them was showing a different sequence for the end part. So it was really intriguing that Disney chose to make it this way. It's something that's so unique and different and very unexpected. It really was much more complex than you might ever know. Back in the early days of Epcot, they had an icon that represented everything in Future World. Epcot itself had a symbol with 5 concentric circles. The symbols represented the concepts for information, communication, technology, education, and entertainment. Horizons kind of captured on all of those things. It was a circle with a line going across the middle, with an upside-down V going through it. Like you were looking off on the horizon. It's almost like a level indicator on an airplane. They printed these icons on maps, guides, and even on the attractions in the parks themselves. At each pavilion, it was a means of representing them, and it was a way to identify each of the different Future World pavilions and how it related back to the idea of Epcot. Here are some quick facts about Horizons that may be interesting. There were about 1,350 feet of track. It used 54 audio animatronics. It had 770 distinct props throughout. There were 24 individual video monitors, 9 video projectors, 12 film projectors, 13 video playback machines, and 50 special effects. It ran at a capacity of about 2,780 four-person cars per hour. The show time was 14 minutes and 25 seconds, cycle time was 15 seconds to load and unload, so the total cycle time was 15 minutes. The maximum number of vehicles that they had on the track at any time was 174, but they did have 10 spare cars that they could roll onto the track at any time if one needed maintenance. The vehicles each had 4 seats in them, and the queue could accommodate 696 people waiting to go in there. One of the cooler things about this attraction was the number of Imagineers that worked on this project at some point. I guess you would expect that based on its size and scale, there would be a large number, but it really is a who's who of heavy hitters. You could look at George McGinnis, Marty Sklar, John Hench, Marty Kendall, Claude Coates, Bob Purcell, Tom Fitzgerald, and on and on and on. Those would be the biggest names you'd recognize, but there were many, many more who contributed to it. These men and a few women had so much influence over so many of the things that Disney did. It was remarkable to see them all involved in this one particular project. The song Happy Birthday was believed to be in the public domain, but it wasn't exactly. It was authorized for non-commercial use, but Disney was using it for commercial use, and the copyright owner sought royalties from Disney for the 17 years of constant operation that the park had been open.
Robert McCall has created a new mural, 60 feet across and 19 feet tall, destined for a futuristic setting not far from the Space Center at Walt Disney World's new Epcot Center. The painting, which took 9 months to complete, depicts man's accomplishments through the ages and leads into a visionary city of tomorrow.
I just wish that I could live forever. I would like to see this future unfold, and I'm not, naive. I know that we're confronted with obstacles, and there will be problems to overcome, and there will be probably wars. I don't see that ending, but I think that there will be a continual progress.
McCall's mural is the finale of a new pavilion being completed in Future World at Epcot Center. Horizons, a ride through adventure, previews what life might be like in the 21st century.
I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the If We Can Dream It song that appeared at the end of the ride. It really did encapsulate what the ride was all about, and I'd like to play it for you here.
Picture in a world
Again, this ride was something special, and it really did go so much further than any other attraction had ever gone before. It brought together something that had meaning and significance, look to the future, and so on. Like many pavilions, there was a sponsor lounge built into the pavilion. Now look, I'll be honest and say I tried to find my way into each of them, with limited success. I play by the rules and don't sneak in anywhere. But I did get to visit the Horizons Lounge and spend a little time there in early 1991, totally legitimately. I had gone to work for a period of time for the General Electric Company out in Daytona Beach. I was still living in Orlando and I was commuting the 30 minutes over to Daytona. I asked around about the lounge and discovered that it was open to anyone who worked at GE. You would just walk up to the right side of the building, then take a path up to the left, and there was a nondescript door that just let you in. On my first trip there, I was a little timid about the whole thing, but I walked in and talked to a nice receptionist in the lobby and asked if I could go up and see the lounge. She simply asked to see my GE badge, which I had with me, and I was invited to take the elevator up to the second floor. You walked into this hallway, and off to one side appeared to be these meeting rooms, but on the other, there's a little open space. There were some couches and comfy chairs. There were snacks and drinks and a few other activities to engage in. There were a couple of people that worked there who were GE employees, and their job was really to provide that sort of hospitality and be the sort of concierge somewhere between Disney and GE. They'd help you make dining reservations or could help you with a little celebration if you had one. If I recall correctly, there was a little passport you could get stamped, and after so many visits, you'd get a prize, like a single-day ticket to Epcot. There were a couple of TVs around showing Disney-related things, and one of them was tuned to a camera that was up on the roof. There was a joystick there in front of it, so you could control where the camera pointed. You could just see a view around the park from inside the lounge. It was kind of cool in a way, and it was sort of geeky, but a lot of fun. There was also a little company store there where you could buy GE or NBC merchandise. And then when you had enough time up there, you were out of the sun for long enough, you cooled down, you had a little drink, you could either take the elevator back down and exit the way you came in, or you could take door number 2 and head into the unload queue for the attraction. It was a totally memorable experience and something I went to pretty much every time I visited Epcot during my time working at General Electric. It was just a lot of fun to be able to say I went to that lounge and I enjoyed it and I experienced it. And it's something I'll never get back because they don't exist anymore. Yeah, there are still some corporate type lounges, but nothing like they were at the original sponsor pavilions. When the contract was up in September of 1993, GE declined to renew their sponsorship, but Disney didn't know quite what to do with the attraction. They decided to close Horizons temporarily while they considered their options. After all, it's an expensive proposition to maintain a ride to keep it up to date and make it really meaningful without a sponsorship. And that's when management realized that the side of Future World had a huge problem. The World of Motion next door was about to undergo a change to become Test Track, after a long negotiation with General Motors. And the Universe of Energy was about to become Ellen's Energy Adventure, and both would need to be closed for a long while, so the changes could be made to them. The Wonders of Life was still operating, but it was arguably the weakest of the pavilions and didn't draw guests in. It wasn't a people eater. It didn't have the weenie that really got people in there. So Disney decided a few months later, after they'd closed Horizons, that they had to reopen it for some period of time to keep people flowing to that side of the park. And surprisingly, it remained that way for several years as they continued to look for a sponsor. Somewhat incredibly, it stayed open and unsponsored for about 5 years until they came up with a concept for Mission Space and closed it for good on January 19, 1999. The reasons for closing the attraction were essentially the same as the reasons that they delayed the opening: money. But oddly, Disney gave other reasons as well. A sinkhole around the building, maintenance issues, a desire to use the space for a new concept, but there were unsaid issues as well. Merchandising, as there really wasn't anything that Disney could sell that was directly related to it. And it also had the same problem as Tomorrowland. It's challenging to keep up to date with a vision of the future. How do you have the vision of the future when the future is already upon you? And that is Horizons. And I guess you could say at this point, our next stop is the 22nd century. Then we can talk about what became Mission Space. It's a completely different attraction, though it kind of captures the idea of going into space, one of the 3 areas that they went into in Horizons. But it's not quite the same. It kind of lost some of that feeling that it had to it. It's much more spectacular. It has that thrill ride element to it. but it isn't the same thing. It doesn't have that same feeling of being something that was really forward-thinking in that sense, where we talked about the future of humanity.